Hello, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third in our series of webinars on facilitating large-scale change. I'm Ian Smith, Programme Lead for Improvement Methodology in NHS England's Sustainable Improvement Team. Introducing and facilitating the webinar today, working with other colleagues in the Sustainable Improvement Team, including Rachel Gray here on the screen, who will be looking after all things technical for us, so please do get in touch with her via the chat box if you need any help or support. I can see many of you have done so already. And joining us today are Elaine Bayliss and Michael Anderson, also from the Sustainable Improvement Team. So Elaine is a nurse by background and experienced large-scale change manager. She's applied the change model that we look at today to national programmes, including end-of-life care and the formation of the Wheelchair Leadership Alliance, running the Right Chair, Right Time, Right Now campaign with Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson. And Michael is an experienced improvement programme manager and has used change model principles to implement lean improvement methods in acute mental health, community and commissioning organisations. Elaine and Michael will lead today's session, which will introduce change models to help understand the change process, as well as practical ways in which change can be facilitated. And I, along with Rachel, will be doing our best to monitor the chat box dialogue and support the interactive sessions of the webinar. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Michael to get us underway and into the main body of the session.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody.
You're welcome.
Okay, so today's session, we're going to focus on the process of change and the change model. So what we'll be going through today? Well, we're going to touch on the stages of change and introduce you to the different aspects of change and how you consider those before starting any transformational change journey. We're going to look at the change model, its background, and each section within it. We're going to run a virtual interactive change model exercise. And hopefully by the end of the session, we'll have met those objectives that are on the screen in front of you. So that is a plan for today's session. So we've got different ways to interact today, so we're just going to do a quick recap on these. First of all, you've got the feedback icons, which can be found just under the participant panel on the right-hand side of your screen. In the bottom right of that section, you've got a little hand and a little megaphone. If you click the little megaphone, you get a little selection of different emojis and ticks and crosses. So can you all give me any emoji you feel like? A yes, an applause, a too slow, a no, whatever you're feeling like at the moment. Thanks, Rachel. Smiley face, always good to see. Great. Yep, people have got the hang of that. That's excellent. Next, we're going to be using the chat box as much as possible today. Just want to pull your attention to making sure that under the Send To box, you highlight all participants. Stick your message in the chat box and then press either Enter or click the Send button. Just remember that all participants, sometimes it can default on your computer to something else, but to make sure everybody can see it, it'd be really useful for all participants to be selected. And finally, the annotation tools. Top left of your screen is a little blue pen or a little pen icon. If you click on that, you get a little selection of different tools, an arrow, some text, and different things. We're going to be using the top one, which is the little arrow that's highlighted there. And let's get straight in and give that a go. So, if you could, we've done this before, I'm sure, but if we could do it again, just to show, oh, people are already there. Stan, jumping in. Excellent. Yep, show us where you're joining from. That'd be amazing. Good to see Callie there, joining us from the very southerly tip of South America. Pretty sure she's in Coventry though, so I'm not sure that's accurate. Thank you, everybody. We've got the hang of that. Oh, there's even some doodles and some drawings going on. This is old hat to most of you, but it's a good refresh from time to time. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop annotating, and we're going to move on. So, hopefully, some of you will have recognized this slide from some of the previous presentations. It illustrates our organizing framework for improvement, which brings together leading large-scale change and the change model to provide a flexible and generic structure for planning and delivering change. Having focused on large-scale change in the first few webinars, we're now going to look at the change model. So, first of all, let's have a look through the stages of change that you can go through. So we've got the Chaska and Di Clemente, I think I said that right, I always struggle with that first one, model here, which shows the 5 different changes of pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And anyone can be at any stage at any time, so you don't have to run through it in order. And we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail now. So we've got pre-contemplation, so this is not quite ready for change. The reasons for the change are understood, but you're not quite there yet. Contemplation, so ready to make a change, what will help us to decide whether we're ready and get others ready. So you're feeling like you're getting ready for some change, but you're not quite in the mindset quite yet. Preparation, so do we have the necessary knowledge to make it? So you're ready, you're raring to go, you just need the tools and you need the experience. Action, do we have the necessary skills to take action to make the change? So if we've got the skills, we've got everything set up, we can do some action, we can make some stuff happen. And finally, maintenance. So is there a supportive infrastructure to help maintain the change? So maintenance, sustainability, those words come up a lot when you're talking about change. So in the chat box, if you want to stick in where you think you are now, that would be great to see, just different people having different points of view on those things. It'll show a difference between the crowd, hopefully, unless we're all at the same stage, which would be a rarity. So there are many different change models available, and we're really interested to know which ones people know about or have used. So at this point, we'd like to take advantage of our interactive functionality on WebEx and stick up a poll. Thank you. I can see loads of stuff coming through the chat of people at different stages, preparation, contemplation's coming up a lot. Some people at action, that's great to see. New project, yes, okay. Rachel, could we possibly run the poll, please? So we have a poll, and we're going to ask, what type of change models have you used to support improvement efforts in the past? You can select other, you can select any of those ones on there. You can select more than one. So we'll just give you 20 seconds or so to fill in this poll. Always fun to leave awkward silences on WebExes. Feel very lonely. Okay, I think we're getting to, most people have hopefully filled it in. We'll just wait for the results to come back. Oh, as people say, stuck on contemplation, very, very slow. Lots of people on contemplation and preparation, a few people moving to action, which is great to see, but it just shows that everybody's at different points in their journey. And some people are just starting out, and some people are a little bit further down the road. Okay, waiting for those poll results to come up. Hopefully they'll be with us in a second. Nothing like a bit of suspense. Keep you on the edge of your seats.
There's clearly people using lots of different models, I think, Michael, so they're having to think between them, decide which ones they're going for.
Yes, that must be it. It's definitely not the slow technology. It's definitely
not at
definitely.
all.
No, it's speedy, isn't it? Once you've selected your poll and you've submitted it, if you want to stick in the chat box, you know, why you chose to use that model or what you found useful about it. It would be great to get a bit of chat going about what people have used, why they used it. Poll results are now coming up. We've still got people coming in with where they are on the change, the process of change, which is also great to see. I would do a drum roll, Rachel, but I'm worried I'm going to have to make it last for about 20 seconds and people are just going to dial off. So wait for that to come in. But yeah, if people want to put in their chats. Okay, so we've got PDSA cycles. Use models, different models depending on the organization they're working in. PDSA coming up again. Project management, Prince 2, Lean. Lots of stuff out there.
It's actually quite helpful, Michael, for the bit that's coming next. Great to see the different models that people are using, actually. So I shall definitely be drawing on the wisdom of the crowd as we go through the next part of the presentation.
Oh yeah.
There we go. I saw the last bit of white space for you.
Whew, thank you. And the results are in. Great. And there is a widespread model for improvement just coming out on top there, I think. But there is a lot of people using a lot of different things, and there's a chunk of people using other things. So we've got a widespread of improvement expertise in the audience, which is great to see. Okay, so having looked at the process of change and different models of change, we now want to introduce the change model as an approach to making change happen. So it was developed in 2012. It's developed to support health and care to adopt a shared approach to leading change and transformation. Based on research, theory, and practical experience, there was a large group of people that came together to build the change model. And as it says, they're developed by hundreds of leaders, clinicians, commissioners from all over health and care. It was reviewed in 2015 and 2016, and actually more recently, earlier on this year, we published it as an interactive PDF. So we used the content that was already there, but we made it a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier to read, and we'll be sharing the links to that with you later on in the presentation. But for now, I've filled my time. I managed to get through the polling. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Elaine.
Okay, thanks very much, Michael. And hello again, everyone. It's really great to be joining you today as a guest speaker in place of being your usual webinar facilitator. So as we go through this next part of the session, I will be referencing 2 different guides, and I thought I'd just mention those now, so I don't cause any confusion as we run through the next 40 minutes or so. So the first is our Leading Large-Scale Change Guide, which was a full refresh of the Leading Large-Scale Change Guide, originally developed by the Institute earlier in the decade, and we refreshed that back in September of last year and published that on the NHS England website. So there'll be lots of references to various elements within that guide that you might find helpful for further background reading as we walk through the change model. And we also have the change model guide, which Michael has just referenced, and we'll give you a quick insight into that as we run through this session. And again, we'll share the links with you so that you can download that guide and have a look at the additional resources and some of the interactive tools that are available within that particular guide itself. Okay, so hopefully that won't get too confusing with 2 different guides on the go. Okay, so what is the change model? Well, I guess for me, the change model is really a way of thinking very constructively about our rounded approach to change. So I think you could call it a philosophy to change, rather more so than a methodology. Now, the model itself, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is made up of 8 component parts or elements. And these start to give us a really helpful organising framework for sustainable and transformational change. And if we use the change model in practice, it can help us to really improve the potential success of our change programmes and the benefit that they can yield for our stakeholders, our patients, families, and the people that we're trying to support with whatever our change initiative is. So the change model then for me is very much an uncomplicated framework, I think, that helps us to consider all of the really key elements that help to make change happen and be successful, and helps us to think about who needs to be involved with us in helping that change to happen. So how does it work? Well, if we look at the model and the 8 components within it, the starting point for the model is always understanding and articulating our shared purpose. This defines and connects people with what needs to be achieved and why, and you absolutely ignore this element at your peril. We're going to pick up a little bit more on our shared purpose in just a moment. After starting with defining and building on our shared purpose, the components of the change model can then be addressed in any order. It really doesn't matter. The key thing is to make sure that you consider each of those component parts in and of themselves and make sure that they're aligned to your shared purpose and that all of the 8 component parts are covered. So let's go back to our shared purpose for just a moment. And as I just mentioned, our shared purpose is always the key starting point for change. If transformational change is going to occur and sustain, we really have to find ways to move beyond individual purpose of why we're doing what we do towards a much more collective shared vision, to coin the large-scale change definition shared with us by Ali last week in her webinar, of our fundamentally new future state. So if we can define our shared vision, we can really start to bring our people and our values together behind a real common goal or a purpose for the change that will really increase our chances for success. So for me then, when I'm thinking about this, there are some key questions to ask ourselves. We need to be saying to ourselves, what really matters to us? What is it we want to do and why should we care about it? We absolutely need to be grounded into the reaching out to the hearts and minds of everybody, that we want to be part of that change and how to connect them to that. So if we can answer those questions, we can really focus attention on why the proposed change should become personally really important to the people that you need on board to help deliver or to champion that change with you. None of this can ever be done in isolation or alone. And it will really help you to start to understand and articulate why this particular solution to the thing we're trying to change, shift, move, rather than any other. So let's just break down that sentence for a minute, our shared purpose. What are we talking about here? Well, for me then, the R is about identifying who are our people. Who will the change affect? Who will define the benefits? Who will make that change happen? There's so much encompassed in that R question, and really sitting down and teasing that out with the people that you think can help you really take that change forward and who will be affected by that change is critical to success. The shared element for me is about starting to build depth and breadth to that vision, and then identifying and agreeing the ambitions and the drivers for change that we've got in common and the values that we combine together to move us from individual to shared values that will drive that change forward. The purpose then is about the why question and about really making it clear to everybody why it matters and linking people to that, linking back again to those hearts and minds. So we'll cover more about shared purpose in just a little while on in this presentation, when I'll take you through a large-scale change programme that I was heavily involved in back in 2015. You can also find out loads more about our shared purpose within our large-scale change guide. And as a top tip, if you go straight to page 46, there's some good examples on there. And we'll be dedicating next week's webinar to building personal narratives and motivating and mobilising people. So if you haven't already registered for that session, please do so. Okay, so what about the rest of the change model? What I'd like to do in the remainder of this middle section is to take a walk together through the different components of the change model and to start to explore what it is that we might need to pay attention to in each of the component areas. Now, as we've already learned at the start of this webinar, that a very good number of you are already using the change model and are familiar with it. I'm really going to make sure that we draw on that wisdom of the crowd as we go through the session. So when we get to various parts of this next part of the presentation, I'll give you opportunities to come in through the chat box and to share with us what you're using and why, what works for you, what challenges you might have around the model, etc. And then we'll have a little walk through each of the component parts of the change model, and we'll start to explore what we might need to pay attention to within that component part. I'll then share with you some example tools, approaches or frameworks that we think it might be useful for you to consider within that component area. And we'll highlight what you can find around these within our now published change model guide. So hope that sounds okay to everybody. And have a quick look in chat. Hopefully everyone's all sorted out with sound now. I think my colleagues are doing a sterling job in the background trying to get that sorted out. So Fiona, yes, love your comment. One of our greatest challenges is that when defining the R, the people most affected are the patients in public, but we sometimes forget to involve them. Really critical point, Fiona. And if we don't involve those people who are affected by the change and actually can help affect the change, we're less likely to be successful, and we could put a huge amount of effort into a change program that actually isn't meeting the needs of the people that will be receiving that change. So spot on, Fiona. Thank you for that comment. Okay, so we're going to start walking through the change model now, and to make this a little bit more fun and random, and with huge thanks, always that turn blame to Michael for the animation. We'll see what you think. We're going to try out the change model Wheel of Fortune. There we go. Okay, so in the first spin of the Wheel of Fortune, we've landed on leadership by all. So this component area asks us to consider and address the question, do our leaders have the skills to create transformational change? I'd love to get your insights and thoughts on this in the chat box. So this is your first opportunity to start getting interacting with one another around the change model itself. So can you take a moment just to have a little think about and to share your thoughts in chat? What type of leaders do you think we need to lead us through transformational change? And what methods, tools or frameworks do you use to help to develop the kind of desired leadership traits and attributes that you think are necessary for change to be successful? So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to start putting in some comments in there. They're flying in already, as we knew we would with so many people on the chat today, which is fantastic. And I'm just going to come to my colleagues, Michael and Ian, in just one moment. So give me a heads up, you're on the desk, to let me know what people are saying. Okay, Michael, what are we seeing coming through in chat?
Seeing empathetic leaders, leaders who are open-minded, leaders that are prepared to listen and learn, decision makers, people that are visible, having high emotional intelligence, visionaries. So all around sort of not being hierarchical, textbook, classic, old school leaders. I think more about this shift into leadership around wanting to learn, wanting to embrace new ideas.
Fantastic. And Ian, any further reflections from you? It's really hard to keep track of this because it's flying up the chat box so fast.
It's hard to get off mute when you're following the chat box as well. There's a couple of good ones that have caught my eye that I like. Authentic leaders that tell stories and co-produce with people caught my eyes, which I also like. Open to sharing. And then another one, which I think feeds into next week very well, leaders good at storytelling. So some good points and good connection into what we'll be looking at next week when we'll be focusing very much on storytelling as well.
Absolutely, and thank you, they're still coming in. This is absolutely amazing. And yes, you're all absolutely spot on. It really is about the harnessing all of those traits that you're showing in the chat box right now, and not having the heroic leader standing out in front so much as having charismatic leaders that work with everybody and can take people on that journey. So thank you, that's absolutely fabulous. As many people have picked up, leadership by all is absolutely about that ability to create and articulate a real clear vision of change. And it's also really importantly about distributed leadership and finding your leaders at all levels of the system, not just those who have leadership roles in hierarchical structures. And you've picked that up really well in the chat box just over these last few minutes. These leaders need to be able to role model transformational change behaviours and have the practical skills to advance change and to be able to identify what additional help and support might be needed and when. So I think having humility as a leader and seeking help and seeking advice and support is absolutely critical to success. One of the resources that we found really helpful for supporting the Leadership by All component is the Leadership Academy's 9 Dimensions of Healthcare Leadership model. And you can see that on your screens now. The model itself helps by describing how you personally can develop as a leader independent of your hierarchical role. And it provides a free self-assessment tool and a 360 feedback tool option that can help you to understand more about your leadership strengths and areas for development. And there's more about that in our change model guide. If you'd like to know further details on Leadership by All and what else you can do to enhance those leadership skills for large-scale change, please take a look at our large-scale change guide. And if you weren't able to join us over the last couple of weeks, you can go back and listen into more on this subject from the first 2 webinars in this series that covered systems leadership and leading large-scale change. And you can find those recordings on our Virtual Academy Network site. And I'm sure Rachel will be popping the links to that and how to join in the chat box as we go through the session today. Okay, so we're going to go back to the Wheel of Fortune again. Let's see where we'll land this time. Right, okay, so motivate and mobilise. So that's a really nice link to the last section. And in this particular component part of the model, we're challenging ourselves even to pay attention to our change efforts in how do we motivate and mobilise other folk to be engaged in the change efforts that we are seeking to take forward. So within Motivate and Mobilise, this is absolutely about identifying who needs to be involved with the change. It's about understanding who our stakeholders are and about framing and reframing our messages, as Ali outlined last week in the Leading Large Scale Change webinar, so that we can reach out and touch into the hearts and minds of all those different people that are affected by the change. It's also absolutely, as you've all pointed out already in chat, about developing engaging stories to get people on board with your change programme and to help you to take forward the progress steps that you need to make. So one of the resources that we have referenced in our change model guide that you might find helpful around this is the Energies for Change model, and this short animation video around Energies for Change that was developed by the NHS Institute for Innovation Improvement a little while ago. This helps you to think about how you can create the right environment to support your change efforts, and also importantly how you can think about your personal resilience. Something that myself and colleagues have come across time and time again as we've been working with people through large-scale change programs is that necessary need to have other people alongside you and walking with you through change to keep your personal energies really high and to maintain that resilience when things don't go quite the way that you planned. So please do take a moment to take care of yourselves as you go through these journeys. So more on motivation and mobilisation is of course within our large-scale change guide, and we also have a whole webinar dedicated to motivation and mobilisation next week. It's going to be led for us by Catherine Pereira, who's the Head of Transformation in the NHS Horizons team, working alongside Helen Bevan. So I'm not going to go over more on motivate and mobilise because you'll have an entire hour dedicated to that next week. Okay, so we're back to our Wheel of Fortune again, and this time we're on to improvement tools. Okay, so this feels like a perfect opportunity for a little bit more interaction, and I'm expecting the chat box to melt at this point, so heads up team to have your eyes peeled to see what people put in the chat. And what I'm really interested to know at this point is what improvement tools are you guys out there finding most helpful in supporting successful transformational change programs? What are you currently using? What are the things that are working for you in advancing change? So let's give you a few minutes to get those in the chat box. PDSA, I love it. People doing plan, do, study, act cycles of change and incrementally growing what is moving people forward. Let's see what else is going to come in there. Lots of ideas whizzing through. Michael, I'm going to come to you first in a second, so hope your reading eyes are on.
Yep.
PDSA is at the top there, isn't it?
Got loads of PDSA, we've got a lot of 5 Ys, we've got loads of mapping, we've got some driver diagrams, we've got some test and learn, force field analysis, plot the dots, live QI, fishbones, QSIR tools, so people using the QSIR program there, which is good, COTA, SPC, I know you don't like that one. Lean, driver diagrams, 5 Ys, yeah, all of those sort of common suspects coming up.
Just seen some of my colleagues in Cumbria plugging the Cumbria production system and the Click website. It is very good if you've not taken a look. And a couple of things that Michael hasn't mentioned, which also I've seen co-production and experience-based design flash past as well. Underused those, I think. The experience-based design tools are still very good.
Fantastic. And there's a couple pinging up there that I've never heard of. BEEF, does anybody else on the team heard of BEEF? Oh yes, Lisa's also asking, what is BEEF? Okay, so we've stimulated a little bit of conversation there. So chat's whizzed up so fast, I'm not quite sure who mentioned BEEF.
I think it's Sarah Donovan had put that on. If you want to expand on what that is, that'd be great. Holding my breath.
It's the meat from cows. Okay, so we have some comedians with us today. Excellent, Joe. I love that. It is indeed meat from cows. Okay, excellent.
Walking the patient journey with patients is just coming, which is a very good way to observe.
Absolutely agree with that one.
See if Sarah comes back with some feedback on.
She's probably typing feverishly away. Indeed.
Or she's laughing into her hands.
Okay, people are even Googling. So we really have 5 people up there around the improvement tools. That's fantastic. Right, we'll find out what BEEF is hopefully in a moment. If it turns out to be a typo, we're going to be sadly disappointed. So let's wait and see what BEEF is. And yes, Callie coming in last there with experience-based design. So a real broad brush approach to the improvement tools and resources out there that we're using across the collective on the webinar today. and super share of what's going on. And yes, you're absolutely right. There are indeed many improvement tools that can support our change efforts. And it's just great to see how many of you are deploying them across the spectrum of your work out there. So we share a number of the real common tools that have just appeared on the chat now with you in the change model guide, including a couple of the resources that you can see on your screens now, which unsurprisingly came out of some of the top hits in the chat box. So we talk about the Institute for Healthcare Improvements Model for Improvement, which of course includes the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles, and the original NHS Improvements First Steps Towards Quality Improvement Guide. I think what's really important to remember is that the change model doesn't specify or recommend a particular set of tools that you should use, but rather it stimulates you and your change teams to think about and agree which improvement methods, approaches and tools could you adopt to support your particular circumstances and change programs. And that's the kind of critical point, really. It's having that conversation and thinking about what your common approach to change is going to be, how you're going to manage that process through, and looking at how you kind of manage your variation. So you can learn a lot more about the various improvement tools that we found to be really effective in section 4 of our large-scale change guide, which handily you can find from page 77 onward. Okay, so I'm just going to come to my colleagues because I wasn't concentrating on chat whilst I was just talking through that bit. Have we discovered beef yet, or are we having just a really lovely conversation about
we have
lots of other things? Here we go. Simone's just come back.
Come back with an answer. It says it builds on SWOT analysis, and the initials stand for build on strengths, exploit weaknesses, expand opportunities, and fight threats. So there you have it.
I like that a lot. Right, and what we love about these webinars is that we learn just as much from you guys as you hopefully learn from us, and building that collective around us in terms of our shared learning is a real strength of these webinars. So more share of that nature, very much welcomed. And it looks, according to Nick, as if we have 2 versions of beef, so that gets even more interesting. Okay, so let's move on. Right, so next component part. Everybody's favourite subject, and this is actually Mr. Smith's favourite subject area. So measurement for improvement. Okay, and here we're asking ourselves, are we measuring the outcome of our change continuously and transparently? So I'm going to risk going back to chat again at this point, and if you've given some thought in your change programs to how you're going to measure whether or not your change is being a success, thinking about that Institute of Healthcare Improvements and change model, we'd be really interested to hear from you in the chat about how are you measuring your changes and what challenges you have in measuring your improvements, or how you actually evidencing that your improvement has been impactful. So we'll start getting that little conversation going in chat now and see what you're all using out there at the moment. It'd be great to see the breadth of different measurement approaches that we've got. And Ian, I'm going to put you on the deck first because I know this is your favourite subject matter area. And I'm not being sarcastic there, everybody. It actually is his favourite subject matter area.
It's one of them. I can't do that. We are seeing stuff come through a good range of things, from audits and financial metrics to staff surveys, feedback from patients and carers, which is good, patient experience, performance, people using the IHI approach, looking at defining baskets of measures, process balancing and outcome measures, more on surveys, going back, retesting and asking questions, so designing, I think, measures in an iterative fashion. Some on audit. Let's have a look. First challenge is finding a baseline to test and measure from. People are talking about key performance indicators in line with their changes, and some people talking about how process outcome and balancing measures, but using plotting the dots, following Samantha Riley's approach to ban the red, amber, green, and tartan blankets. I think Barbara has called that. Samantha's going to join us in 2 weeks' time to do a little bit more on measurement and plotting the dots and how we can use that in large-scale change. So if you would like to join us for that, that would be grand. It looks like a lot of people are very much up to speed. A lot on SPC, working across the system, agreeing one version of the data. That is very, very challenging. Co-designing the measures, which is very good, good suggestion, good idea, I think. What else have we got? Staff feedback is one that I've not seen so far today. And Ricky is saying that her roles staff who are impacted, and therefore it's important to continue to engage staff and provide support. So I think some good points for measuring from different perspectives and on different domains.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolute breadth of ways that people are approaching measuring whether or not their change is a success. And please carry on sharing that in the chat as we work through. That would be excellent. So great share of stories there. And yes, what we're considering in this change model component is what is the best way to measure improvement? Do we have accountability and benchmarking considered in our change efforts? How can we identify meaningful and observable outcomes and improvements? And what might be the right measures to show improvement over time? And how can we show that we've made a difference? This includes thinking about how could we publish our data? You know, who are we publishing that data to? Who is our audience? What do they need to know? And how can we make sense of our data for them? So it links back to that need to frame and reframe all of our messages for the different audiences that we're engaging with. We have a number of approaches that can help you with this within our change model guide, and two of them are shared with you on the screens now. So they are the A to Z of measurement and the 7 steps for measurement for improvement, both developed by my colleagues within our former organisation, NHS Improving Equality. And if you'd like to know more about these and other measurement approaches, you can find out more in our Leading Large Scale Change Guide, which again, hopefully I'll tell you within section 4.4 and starts on page 92. And as Ian's just mentioned, again, we're not labelling this on the webinar today because we have a whole hour's webinar dedicated to measurement for improvement, which is fantastically going to be led by Sam Riley from NHS Improvement and our colleague Alison Johnson from the Sustainable Improvement team, coming up in just a couple of weeks' time, so please register for that if you haven't done already. Also to help you, my lovely colleagues in the Impact Research and Evaluation team within SI have developed an impact framework, and that's had international recognition. This can help you to evidence the effect of your change interventions, where you have got incremental change over time, and attribution is a bit of a challenge because there are so many competing factors. So please do get in touch with us via the Virtual Academy Network site or through our Virtual Academy email address, which hopefully Rachel will pop in the chat box for you shortly if you would like any more information about this. Okay, moving on to the next component part. So now we've landed on project and performance management. And in this component, we're being asked to consider, do we have an effective approach for delivery of change and monitoring of progress towards our planned objectives? So the evidence base around project and performance management is, as you know, very broad and strong. In essence, this component of the change model is reminding us that whilst we don't need to be very purist about deploying project and performance management methodologies, we should absolutely ensure that we have sound project and performance management disciplines and focus in place. So this will enable us to have greater quality control on our change programs, and that will increase the probability of delivering benefits of real importance. If we don't address this component, then it's much more likely that other components of the change model will fail. At its very basic level then, what we're thinking about is ensuring that we have agreed and adopted an effective project management methodology that works for our local circumstances, that we've thought about our timelines, what some of the milestones might be on that timeline, and what the governance arrangements are, whilst also allowing for emergent change where large-scale change is underway, and that we have clearly identified objectives and a process in place for capturing and sharing the impacts of achieving those objectives. So again, more information on this component part can be found within our change model guide. And now we're on to our penultimate change model component. So where are we going this time? Okay, so this time it's system drivers. And how can we use system drivers to help support our change programs? This component is really challenging us to think about whether we've aligned our processes, our systems and our change ambitions to the current system drivers that are out there for us, such as the 5-year forward view, to better help and support our change efforts and to ensure that they actually are required. There's no point of putting all of our efforts into a programme that is out of kilter with the system ambitions or the local ambitions for something that's a real driver for us in our locality. Considering system drivers helps us to better identify why our proposed change is necessary, and therefore it underpins our case for change. It can also help us to increase stakeholder support if we can align our change efforts to the relevant intrinsic and extrinsic motivators that are affecting the people within our immediate sphere affected by that change. And we give examples of this in our change model guide, as you can see illustrated on your screens now. There's much more on system drivers and motivating factors in the large-scale change guide from page 65 onward. And ultimately, it's about making sure we make those connections between our overarching change programme and the current system drivers. Why do we need to make the change? How does it link to national policy and guidance? How does it support partnerships and new ways of working? And if we can make that alignment really clear to everybody and tap into those intrinsic and extrinsic motivators, we've much more chance of bringing more distributed leaders on board to help us to sustain that change going forward. Okay, so to complete this section of the webinar today, we're going to have a look at our last change model component. And for those of you that have been busy tracking our progress, if you've had time to whilst writing in chat, there'll be no surprise that we're about to land on spread and adoption. And I think some people have just started talking about how important it is to share lessons learned across countries, just not organisations. Absolutely key point, Lizzie. Okay, so for the last time in this section, let's get interactive again. And could you share with us in the chat box, how have you been designing for the active spread of innovation from the starts of your projects? Are you doing that right from the outset? Or are you waiting to the end and hiding away in a darkened room until your change is a success? How are you going about managing spread and adoption? So, Michael, I'm going to put you up on the deck first, just to see what people are saying in terms of sharing.
Yeah, they're saying, well, we've got a few people in so far, trying to consider it when creating the PID, make use of patient safety collaboratives and AHSNs, work regionally and nationally, building it into part of the project and making sure they look at previous lessons learned, more emphasis on evaluation and then presenting, clinical engagement events, learning workshops, so that sharing learning papers through communities of practice, so trying to get in through all networks that they can, I think, is the sort of overarching message.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And it looks like people are really giving some thought to this. Interested to know in chat, whilst I just kind of move on now, how soon in your programs people are starting to think about change? Are we kind of doing that from the beginning? Because I think that's the key bit that we're saying here. So thank you for sharing those stories in chat. And for us in the final component of the model, that's a really critical point. It's about planning from the start in terms of how you might share and spread your change journey, learning and outcomes. And this will be most effective if we can do this as the journey unfolds rather than waiting until the very end of our projects. We need to make sure we're using a variety of channels and media to share our stories so that we're framing and reframing and reaching people in the ways that resonate with them best. We need to celebrate our successes, and we also need to not be afraid of sharing our challenges. These very often are the real pertinent stories that really help other people, and to avoid some of our pitfalls early on, so that we're then potentially accelerating their transformational efforts in a much more speedier way than we might have done if we wait to the very end of our change programs to share what we've learned. And finally, we do need to remember to listen to and learn from others. Let's remember that humility part of change. So a really useful super resource from the IHI that can help you with spread and adoption is their 7 spreadly sins. And again, you'll find lots more about spread and adoption within our large-scale change guide. And as a top tip, try looking at page 70 for one particular option. Okay, so that completes our walkthrough of the change model components, and thank you so much for the really fantastic interactive chat that's been going on around that and still going on right now to help us bring that section to life. In this last little section of today's webinar, I thought it might be helpful to take you through an example of how I've deployed the change model in practice. I used it as a diagnostic tool to help identify strengths and weaknesses in a national transformational programme that I led. And we're then going to try and see if we can run a simulation of that exercise live on screen for those of you that haven't used the change model before. Now that's going to be fun with the best part of 300 people on, but we'll see how we go. So to set the scene, Back in 2015, I was the programme lead in NHS Improving Quality for the Wheelchair Services Improvement Programme. And we'd been brought in by the NHS England Wheelchairs Programme team to assist them to do more to accelerate the change efforts to improve wheelchair services across England for the 1.2 million people that use that service. This followed identification that there was a real pressing need for cross-system change to address issues with known waste, delays and harms that were being highlighted by very many service users. In phase 1 of the programme then, and bearing the change model components in mind and the need for balance between them, we examined what the data was telling us about wheelchair services, and we published our e-digest, Right Chair, Right Time, Right Now. This helped us to establish our case for change. Then recognising that there were other gaps in the transformational change elements in the way that the programme was kind of going forward, we facilitated a wheelchair summit, and this brought together all key stakeholders to agree what else we could do to build shared purpose and help accelerate positive change efforts and to motivate and mobilise new distributed levers to get behind that change. This led to a significant number of new initiatives in phase 2 of the programme, and they included the establishment of a National Wheelchair Alliance, chaired by Baroness Penny Gray-Thompson. And the Alliance brought together key leaders from across service users, carers, charities, providers, commissioners, and suppliers sectors to unite behind the improvement effort to really build shared purpose and to champion key changes. We then set about developing a wheelchair charter, and this was to outline what good should look like in effective wheelchair services. This really helped us to create a sound vision for the future that people could get behind. And then we created a national mobilisation campaign. This was called Right Chair, Right Time, Right Now. And this was aimed to ignite people to support our burning ambition to significantly improve wheelchair services countrywide. And this was hugely successful with mass media coverage across something like 54 BBC radio stations. The Guardian Online got behind it. We had slots on BBC, 6 o'clock news. So raising the profile was hugely successful. However, despite the success of these interventions, this still wasn't enough for us. So having raised the profile of wheelchair services and the fantastic people that work within that service but who wanted to improve it further, we felt there was an urgent need to help support those that delivered and improved the care delivery to improve that care delivery even further. So we wanted to work proactively with a number of wheelchair services around the country to help them to accelerate their wheelchair service improvement programmes. From the outset then, we used the change model to frame our support offer and to provide us with a diagnostic tool to assess organisations' readiness for change prior to creating 30, 60, 90-day action plans to support them with their transformational programmes. And this approach was really successful when we used it with 4 CCGs, in particular in the north of the country, to help them to further develop their wheelchair services transformation plans. So what we're going to do now is have a very quick go at running that change model diagnostic. So on your screen, we have what is a mock-up of our change model image, and this in normal circumstances would be a face-to-face meeting where we have the change model on the floor and we get you to kind of move around it. Now we can't move around with best part 300 of you, but what we can do is use the annotation tools. So what I'd like to invite you to do is have a little look at the different component parts of the change model on your screen now, and think about which one do you feel most comfortable addressing, or which component do you relate to the most, which is your go-to when you're starting on your change programme. And, oh, thank you, you've already started, you're ahead of me. Grab your arrows and point to that on the screen, and let's just see if we can completely obliterate the change model. Just give you a few moments to get those arrows on. Wow. Nick, I don't know where you're going, but you're off the model, mate. Nick's now moving backward. That's absolutely fantastic. So I think we can see from that that we have got an absolute blend of what people find is the component that they're most comfortable with addressing. Just get the last couple of arrows on, and Rachel, we can take a screen grab of that. That would be fantastic. can I invite you now in chat to just let us know why you're drawn to that particular component part? What is it you find comfortable about it? It's just interesting to know why it is you're drawn to that particular component part. I think key for us is it's so important to remember that considering all the component parts of the change model in equal measure is what's going to be the ingredients of your success. So kind of running this exercise with your team is a really good starting point to see where their strengths and weaknesses lie. And we'll come back to chat in just a moment. So Ian and Michael, just teeing you up ready for some feedback in just a minute. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do is, no surprises, we're going to repeat that exercise, but this time, can you use your arrow pointer to indicate which of the components you least relate to, or the ones that you struggle with the most? And then let us know why in the chat box. And why am I not surprised to see measurement coming up really quickly? And spread and adoption. Right, so we're getting a lot more grouping at the moment, so people are moving around a wee bit. Let's just get a few more arrows in. See how the spread's working on that one. Okay, so Michael, what are your reflections on how those arrows are landing?
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I've got a full spread on the first one, and this time we've got people definitely gravitating towards spread and adoption, and I think that one says measurement, although I can't see it anymore. So that's what people are struggling with. Some people are saying that just need more training in certain areas, measurement, because often the outcomes are much later than the end of the program. So you see, I can see that the project plan says till the end of this point, but actually you don't get any realization of benefits until much further down the line. Measures is definitely coming up as the biggest issue, because somebody's just put there, no one wants to do it. We don't use this enough to inform decisions and see improvements. So yeah, I think there's a lack of enthusiasm for measurement, not necessarily a lack of skills, but a lack of ability to get them done and get people engaged with them.
Very timely then that we have that whole webinar dedicated for measurement for improvement coming up in just a couple of weeks, and Joe and Alison are just fab in terms of taking you through that and helping with top tips in sort of how to manage some of the pitfalls and how to try and be effective in your measurements. So absolutely do sign up for that if you haven't done already. But yeah, I think that's just fabulous. Even just doing it remotely very quickly, we can see a real shift in terms of commonality across what people are drawn to in terms of the one that they are most comfortable with, and a little bit more shared grouping in terms of the ones that we feel are a little bit more challenging. I think what this goes to show is if you conduct this exercise with your change teams, it really helps to show where your strengths and weaknesses lie, as it has been in our group today, in relation to the fullness of our approach to change. And it can help us to identify who across our teams has strengths in different areas that we can draw on to help bridge any weaknesses that we think we might have. So once you've conducted that change model diagnostic exercise, if you do this for real, I would recommend that you spend much more time on if you have conversations with each other about what those different component parts mean to you and what it is that you feel you're able to contribute in that particular area and what you need help and support with. You can then do as I did with the North of England senior leaders in the Wheelchair Services Programme, and use those conversations and insights to score your strengths and weaknesses against each of the model component areas. And by scoring your strengths and weaknesses for each element, you can then illustrate where you are now as a change team versus where you need to be if your transformational change programme is to have the best chance of success. So in the example gap analysis template that's on your screens now, you can see that more attention in this particular example from the North of England CCG teams needed to be paid to building their shared purpose, motivating and mobilising, measurement and use of improvement tools. And what we did from that conversation was to use this change model action plan to start then to develop ways that they were going to tackle those weaker areas and address those weaknesses going forward. So both this gap analysis tool and the action planning template that you've been seeing on the screen over the last few seconds are available to you in the change model guide. and we'll share copies of them with you in the Virtual Academy Network site. And within the action plan, we've also posed some questions for you to ask of yourselves within the action planning template to help you to start thinking about ways to address any areas of potential weakness. So do give them a go, and the interactive version of that gap analysis tool now is absolutely fabulous, and Michael and colleagues have done a grand job of bringing that to life for my first iteration of a little simple spider diagram. So I've talked a lot about the change model guide. Here's a quick sneaky dip into it. This is the change model guide front cover, and this is available to download now from the Sustainable Improvement Team's webpage. And Rachel, if you haven't done already, because I'm losing track of chat, there we go, I've just popped that into the chat box for you. Within the guide, we expand further on all the change model components. So it's an interactive PDF. You click across the little tabs at the top, and it will take you into more of a discussion and links to other tools, frameworks, and techniques that you can use behind each part. And we also take you through the principles that underpin the change model and share with you those gap analysis tools that I've just taken you through. So if you haven't downloaded it yet, please do go and take a look and make us happy, because it'll increase our download figures even further. Thank you very much. I've also been asked to plug at this point something else that's on offer to you from across the SI team. So for those of you who want to make improvements, that are quite new to this and aren't quite sure where to start, or if you know there are colleagues in your team who are new to improvement and would do with a foundation course in quality improvement, we're just about to launch our Improvement Fundamentals massive open online course, which starts on the 16th of July. This is a free online course that anyone can join across health and care, that's delivered in mini courses, and it covers all aspects of quality improvement that are applied to your local projects. So more information on that is available from on the NHS England website, www.england.nhs.uk/sustainable improvement/improvement-fundamentals, and we'll be popping that link in the chat box for you right now. So we're rapidly running out of time. In a very quick summary then, I'm sorry I've not left a huge amount of time at all for questions, I'm afraid. The change model provides a systematic way to consider all of the critical dimensions that might affect our change programs. It will give you real insights into a range of tools and resources that can support the effectiveness of your change programs. There are 8 component parts that can be used in any order, but the important thing is for them to use them in equal measure and really focus on developing our shared purpose. And if you use the model to assess your readiness for change at the start of your change initiatives, you can really start to increase your chances of success. Right, Ian, over to you. So sorry, just the last 3 minutes, I'm afraid.
Well, yes, you're right. We are almost out of time, and we did make a promise early on that we would start on time and end on time, so we will do our very best to keep it. So just before we sign off on the last slide, a few questions have been in the chat box about things such as, can I view the previous sessions? Will the slides and resources be available from today? The answer to both of those things is yes. All of the resources that we reference and mention through all of the webinars, the ones we've done so far today and the 3 remaining to come, will be on our collaboration space on NHS Networks, which you can see hopefully on the screen there now. That will include recordings of the sessions, which will be posted as videos on the site as soon as we can download them and convert them from WebEx. And the network, the presentation slides will be available as PDFs for you to use and reference as well. So finally, before we bring the session to a close, just a quick reminder on a couple of things. First of all, next week we have mobilising and organising with our good colleague Catherine Pereira. We've mentioned it a little bit today as one of the key components of the change model, along with things like storytelling. We'll go into that in more depth, which is usually a very, very good session with Catherine, so please do come and join us for that. And the very final thing before we go, when we close the session and leave, there will be a pop-up in WebEx, which will have an after-action survey. It helps us to learn how we can make these sessions better for the future, and there are also some knowledge questions in there which are an important part of the process if you are looking to claim the CPD points that are available for each of the webinar sessions that do complete the survey when the session closes. So I think that is all we have for you today. Many thanks for joining us this afternoon, and many thanks for all of your comments and contributions. I hope that you have a great day, and I hope that many of you can come back next week to join us again for mobilising and organising. That's all, folks. Many thanks. Have a great afternoon.